there's different types of prophecies and different intentions with the prophecies, and you're 100% right by analyzing not the specific prophecies, but the reasons behind it, and that's how you tie these people together, like whether or not the sort of latter rain teaching of IHOPKC perfectly mirrors the latter rain teaching of Branham. The intentions are so similar because they is it used to, like you said, invoke fear to capture hearts, but there's also just the magic trick prophecies, where it's about the spectacle. It's about predicting something and then using those accurate predictions to then reaffirm your sort of divine connection. This is 100% what my dad was all about, and still is all about, is using these predictions. And it would be really funny because he would do it all the time with football game scores. He would be like, I had a dream that it was going to be 35-17 and da 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 da. And I probably, this is not, I'm not exaggerating. I've probably won about like $5,000 off of my dad through the course of, because every time he would do that, I would bet him $100 that I could predict closer. And it was kind of like it was just for fun between us. And whether he paid me for all of those, I don't know. I definitely did win a decent amount of money off of him because he would just make these wild predictions, and I would be like, no, I think it's going to be this and stuff. And in our relationship and in kind of conversational, it wasn't as intense. Like, he would make these predictions and people would be like, oh, Bob's just having fun. But then when he got things right or close to right, it would then become prophecy. And then he would use it, and he would have all these different stories of how this prophecy that he got right and that it signified something. And it was like, well, it wasn't serious when you said it. And then the only ones that you're taking seriously are the ones that you got right or you got close to right. Or sometimes he wouldn't even get it right, and he would just retell the story as if he got it right. And it became this sort of clear pattern of just trying to build up the magician persona. And the way that Bob Jones excused these behaviors, according to my dad and according to Bob Jones, like, Bob Jones said that if you're 10% accurate as a prophet, you're doing something right. That most prophets are only 10% accurate. And I remember my dad telling me that, and me being a young kid and like being like, oh, okay, giving a lot of grace for the prophets. And then it's like, well, if you're only 10% correct, stop saying these things. Then, like, what's the point? It doesn't help at all. And I think that's where kind of one of the big points of this conversation about the prophetic promises is that they're so inaccurate and deceptive. They're fundamentally destructive to the people who believe them, right? If you believe in all of these prophecies, and let's say Bob Jones is right that it's only 10% correct, but I don't even think it's 10%, but let's say only 10% of the prophecies are correct, then it is better for you to not believe a single one of them, because if you do believe them, 9 out of 10 are going to be wrong, and you are going to live your life based off of these prophecies, thinking that they come from the Lord. And that's fundamentally going to be destructive to you. There's one that I wanted to also talk about today, because one of the most significant ones was right when I was leaving high school in 2010, which this one, I don't know how many people were affected by this one, but I know that I was deeply affected by it. There was a really weird, IHOP in 2010 was just a weird place. There was the awakening during that time. I don't know if you've talked about, maybe in later episodes we could talk about the awakening, because there was this sort of mini revival that hit the IHOPKC world, where we were having meetings almost every single night, and there was all these sort of manifestations of the Holy Spirit. People were falling over, and there was testimonies of healing and dreams and prophecies and all that sort of stuff. It was a very exciting time for me when I was believed in it. Now I realize that it was a pretty destructive time, but that's a whole different topic. But it was just in general, it was a very tumultuous sort of time of my life and IHOPKC's kind of life. There was a lot going on, and there was this huge prophecy that Terry Bennett gave to Mike Bickl, which I don't know if you know who Terry Bennett is. He's really not a big figure in the IHOPKC world. A lot of times Mike would latch on to some of these smaller prophets. So prophets would come in, travel, and give a prophetic word, and it was kind of up to Mike's discretion whether or not he would take it. I don't think that Mike gave many grand prophecies after the 80s, 90s. Once IHOP began, Mike wasn't really actively involved in giving some of these larger prophecies. He was mainly kind of a leader figure who would then bring in others to give prophetic words, whether that's Chris Reed, whether that was Terry Bennett. So anyway, Terry Bennett comes in and they have this meeting, and it's never really spoken of from the pulpit at IHOP in full detail. It's just talked about, hey, there's going to be, in the next 5 years, there's going to be these big trials and tribulations, and that there's going to be this great shaking. And for me, it sort of signified, we've been talking about the end of times. We've been talking about the tribulation. It's going to happen. Next 5-10 years, there was always this sort of, we don't know when it's going to happen. We know it's going to happen in the generation, but no one knows the date or the hour. But this was sort of the signifier where it was okay, now it's right around the corner. And I remember kind of being half in and half out. Half of me was yeah, okay, this makes sense that things are starting to reach a fever pitch. This is the time in which the Lord is going to return. And then half of me was already starting to be I think that this is kind of not true. I think that kind of all of this is not true. And I was 18, right on that sort of beginning to ask questions myself. And immediately after this, I went to YWAM and did some missions work and stuff. But in my head, this was sort of a very important moment. And I remember getting a hold of the specific Terry Bennett prophecy. And it's not general. It's very, very specific. He talks about the angel Gabriel came to him and gave him this message in 2001. And now he was saying that it was going to begin in this season. The dates were very specific. It was going to be 2015 was when it was supposed to culminate. There were going to be solar flares that shut down 90% of all communications. There was going to be earthquakes that were going to hit the East Coast, not the West Coast, that were going to destroy, half of America. This is just verbatim. I continued to see effects. The sun did a weird thing. It was like a solar flare. The magnetism of the earth was increased. The tilt of the earth was altered so that time itself changed all over the earth. And then I continued to see the effects of that was the satellites were both blinded, and some of them were yanked out right of the sky. God blinded the communications of the earth, cell phones, all types of things, military hardware, commercial hardware. People were blinded. GPS was useless. The magnetic north itself altered, which affected all forms of travel, especially by sea and by land. So, and it keeps going. And I bring this all up to be this was what was being said. And now, if you find the ways that Terry Bennett or others or Mike even talks about this message, there's zero accountability for this prophetic word. Like, absolute 2015 came and went. None of these things obviously happened. The earth didn't tilt, right? The time has not been fundamentally altered on earth. There was not a solar flare that blinded all of military and commercial hardware. These were all very specific promises. These were things that I believed or half believed. Like, I half believed they were true, and then half was like, this is pretty crazy. And there's just zero accountability for the fact that this was the prophecy that was being spread, and it was kind of done in a very secretive way amongst IHOP. Like, it was talked very generally from the stage. It was very, we think that these things are going to happen. We have this, Gabriel came, and I don't even know if he from the stage ever talked about the angel Gabriel in this, but this was sort of the motivation behind a lot of the prophecy that was happening in 2010. And behind the scenes, everybody was kind of talking about this, and this was the specific details that were given. And it's just so false and so shallow, so completely devoid of any truth, any reason, and is just fodder to scare and control individuals. And it sucks because it happened to me. Like, I was scared and I was controlled. I didn't go to like a regular college. I went to YWAM, and I, I'm fine with the way that I've lived my life and everything like that. But it does feel like the shape of my life was fundamentally altered by prophetic promises like this. And there is absolutely zero accountability for any of it.